ठीक है। हाँ, हॉलिस्टिक वे में फिर वो थोड़ा ज़्यादा ही हॉलिस्टिक हो जाएगा, ठीक है। और अभी हम देखेंगे टॉपर्स आंसर से भी कि अल्टीमेटली जितना नोट्स बनता है उसका कितना परसेंटेज लिख पाते हैं हम लोग, ठीक है। तो एक्चुअली PYQ से बन पा रहा है तो सही है, आंसर्स लिख पा रहे हो तो सही है, नहीं लिख पा रहे हो तो गलत है। हाँ, see ultimately I told you that PYQs are the main उसके लिए तो ज्वाइन करना पड़ेगा। खुद से करने के लिए मैंने बताया था कि जैसे डिमांड ऑफ द क्वेश्चन यदि फुलफिल हो रहा है, ठीक है। आवाज इको करिए, बता दीजिएगा। तो सबसे पहले जो द थिंग दैट यू हैव टू से इज दैट डिमांड ऑफ द क्वेश्चन यू आर फुलफिलिंग और नॉट, व्हाटएवर इज द आस्क ऑफ द क्वेश्चन। हाँ हाँ, ठीक, वैसे भी कर सकते, ठीक है। सो good morning all of you. A PDF has been given to you, right? Now today we'll look into some of the questions on from the topic Indian nationalism and making of Indian constitution, ठीक है। Now the idea of this particular session is कि जो भी हमने क्लास में पढ़ा है उसको कैसे एग्जाम ओरिएंटेड वे में पढ़ा जाए, एंड थ्रू PYQ वी वांट टू रिवाइज द सिलेबस, ओके। कितने लोगों का अभी फाउंडेशन बैच चल रहा है, ऑनगोइंग बैच, एंड दोज हु हैव कंप्लीटेड फाउंडेशन बैच कंप्लीटेड, ठीक है। Now in the 50 classes that we are going to do, target is that at least we must be doing somewhere around 300 questions, okay. And if you refer to the model answers solution to the question which is being given, definitely exam में जो भी question पूछा जाएगा उसका आंसर इसका सबसेट ही होगा, okay. So whatever we will make you write उसका सबसेट होगा. For example, if it is a question on Marxist perspective on Indian nationalism, so whatever I am going to make you write in 10 marker, 15 marker or even 20 marker, you will be able to write a subset of this only, okay. And we can also say to the extreme that if you are just referring to these PYQs for that particular topic, क्योंकि एग्जाम से पहले बहुत कुछ सारी 7 to 8 copies you will not be able to study, okay, then questions you will be able to answer. There will be certain questions which will digress slightly, maybe exact वैसा ही language नहीं रहे question का, but ultimately the main demand of the question overlaps, आप उसको answer कर सकते हैं, okay. Now the paper that has been given to you, here you have questions from Indian nationalism topic and making of Indian constitution. अब जो Indian nationalism topic है, there are two subparts to it. One is the strategies of Indian national movement. This is typically what you study in modern India, non-cooperation movement, quit India movement, ahimsa, satyagraha. Typically it is just moderate extremist, और question generally वहां से 10 marker में पूछे जाते हैं, and whatever you have read for the modern India history you can write directly that. The second part of this topic, it is the perspective on Indian nationalism. Now this is the topic for the political science, because here we are going to refer to the Dalit perspective, the nationalist or the liberal perspective, the Marxist perspective, socialist perspective, and a radical humanist perspective. Now out of all these, if you see the PYQs, most number of questions have been asked from the Dalit perspective, then Marxist perspective, okay, then liberal perspective. अब जो radical humanist perspective है, that is the same as you have to read in Indian political thought in M.N. Roy. तो जो भी Indian political thought में आप M.N. Roy के बारे में पढ़ेंगे, you can write it in the radical humanist perspective. So उसको separate और इसको separate पढ़ने की जरूरत नहीं है. Okay. From this, the three important themes that we are going to pick up is the Dalit, Marxist and liberal perspective. एक और different perspective है which is not explicitly mentioned here, maybe, that is the cultural nationalist perspective. That is the perspective represented by Aurobindo Ghosh and Rabindranath Tagore. So mostly that perspective is used for criticizing these mainstream perspective as such. ठीक है, so Dalit, Marxist and the liberal perspective we are going to use. So your first question है that is given. Discuss the contribution of Dalit struggle. Okay. Discuss the contribution of Dalit struggle to establish egalitarianism in Indian society during freedom movement. Now again, this is not directly asking you the Dalit perspective, but it is of the same nature. ये इस साल का क्योंकि हर बार केवल एक लाइन नहीं यूपीएससी डालेगा कि write about the Dalit perspective. But when it is saying that talk about the contribution of Dalit people or Dalit scholars or Dalit leaders in the Indian national movement, it is basically saying talk about the Dalit perspective of Indian national movement. Okay. So from the language that has been used in the question, always try to connect with what is there in the notes. That is going to be the main content, and इस लैंग्वेज को आप इंट्रोडक्शन में, कंक्लूजन में इस तरीके से यूज करेंगे ताकि लगे कि कंक्लूजन में आप इसी नेचर में जा रहे हैं. Therefore we can say that other than the liberal and this, Dalit perspective has also contributed, something like that. The other two questions are very much direct. The question which was asked in 2019 and then 2011, that Dalit perspective on Indian nationalism you have to discuss. ये बहुत ही direct सा question, इसमें कुछ समझने की जरूरत नहीं है, सीधे लिखिए. This is what we call as the indirect language referring to the Dalit contribution. And then the question asked in 2011, that is Dalit perspective on Indian national movement. Now you will notice that these are the question 20 marker, 150 marker है तो ये तो 10 marker में आ गया, and then 200 words. Okay, so these are being repeated. Dalit perspective is being repeated. ठीक है, तो इसको एक क्वेश्चन लिखेंगे. जस्ट राइट दिस क्वेश्चन. क्रिटिकली एग्जामिन the Dalit perspective on Indian national movement. And assume that we are writing a 20 marker question, so that full 4 page का क्या content हो. Now when you will talk about Dalit perspective, somehow of all the questions in the perspective on Indian nationalism, there can be one common introduction, one common conclusion. Introduction can be that you can say that the concept of Indian nationalism and the concept of India as a nation has been a contested concept. या फिर this can be one starting point, or the starting point can be, जितने भी perspective में पढ़ना है, the starting point is the colonial perspective. The starting point is the colonial perspective. वहीं से उसी का reaction liberal perspective है, उसी का reaction cultural nationalist perspective है, उसी का reaction is Marxist and others also. So the starting perspective can be the colonial perspective. This can be a universal introduction for any question which is being asked on this particular topic. Similarly, when it comes to conclusion, there will be a universal conclusion, and that universal conclusion is, after writing about the main content, that the nature of Indian national movement is so comprehensive that it is not possible to understand the scope of the movement just from one perspective. इसे आप justify करेंगे कि even the Dalit perspective, Marxist perspective, radical humanist perspective, cultural perspectives, all perspectives are required. Now why I am saying this is because right now आपको लगता होगा कि now we will make introduction and conclusion there, but actually if you are not prepared beforehand a universal introduction and conclusion, then it will be difficult. In between, whatever is the demand of the question you are going to address, चाहे वो Marxist perspective, कोई भी perspective पूछा गया आप उसको address करें. Now when you are addressing this core demand of the question, although even the word, यहाँ पे तो मैंने question में आपको एक शब्द लिखवा है critically examined, even if it is not critically examined and if it is a 20 marker, you will have to refer to the other perspectives. केवल आप एक monochromatic answer केवल एक perspective से नहीं लिख सकते, because that will make your answer boring and maybe you will also be short of the content. And if it is a 4-page answer, आपने दलित perspective पे लिखना start किया, after talking about that, in order to better explain yourself, better express yourself, you'll have to compare it with the Marxist perspective, the liberal perspective, the Gandhian perspective, the cultural perspective, and then in the last वही conclusion जाना है कि the nature of the Indian national movement was so comprehensive that it is difficult to comprehend it just by one person. हमें अलग-अलग perspective से उसको study करना पड़ेगा. So for this particular chapter, this can be a blueprint of the design that you may follow. Now coming to the demand of this question, Dalit perspective पे जब भी question आए, start with the colonial perspective. Now the colonial perspective said that India is not a nation. यहाँ पे हम बात कर रहे हैं perspective on Indian national movement, and the colonialist perspective represented by scholars like James Mill, J.S. Mill, Winston Churchill, all of them said that India is not a nation. And if India is not a nation, where is the question of national movement? They would say that India is not a nation, it is no more a nation than an equator. It is so diverse that it is just a geographical expression, and this geographical expression is also because of the Britishers, and the moment Britishers leave, the country is going to disintegrate. तो वो इस चीज को एक्सेप्ट ही नहीं कर रहे हैं कि इंडिया एक नेशन है. Forget about accepting that there is something called as Indian national movement. Now colonialists are saying that India is not a nation. जब आप इस पर्सपेक्टिव की बात करेंगे, there is one way to add dimension to your answer is you can also draw similarity. India is not a nation is being said by colonialists. India is not a nation would be said by Dalits. Nation is an artificial concept would be said by Marxist. And liberals would say India is a nation in making. There is only one major perspective, cultural nationalist perspective, which says that India has been the nation for thousands of years. तो आप similarity, दो paragraph can be easily, one paragraph for the similarity that you will draw from the other perspective. The other can be for the difference or the break that is there. Now this is how you actually add dimension to the answers to make it quite comprehensive. आपने colonialist perspective बता दिया. Now then you will come to the Dalit perspective. Now when you talk about Dalit perspective, there are 3 names you have to mention, and more than that you will not be able to in the answer. You have to start with, of course, Mahatma Phule, because he is actually the root from where the Dalit perspective on Indian nationalism starts. You will mention Periyar, and of course Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Now these three are the stalwarts of the Dalit leaders in the national movement. Any answer would be incomplete without referring. Of course, you cannot forget mentioning any of all the three names are very important. And they have in themselves done such a comprehensive analysis of this that after that you will have to start talking about the counter argument. For example, when Phule talks about Indian national movement, he is also saying that India is not yet a nation. Similarity with the colonialist. He says that India is divided across caste. And when he is being asked about Indian nationalism, he says that nationalism is the new form of Brahmanism. New form of Brahmanism. So basically, when Marxists will draw every debate into one dimension of class conflict, the Dalit scholars, they will draw every debate of national movement into caste conflict. वो एकदम उनका वो one-sided argument हो जाता. So he says that nationalism is a new form of Brahmanism, which will ensure the domination of upper caste. Now, whenever you are criticizing the mainstream Indian nationalism, it is incomplete without criticizing Gandhi and Indian National Congress, because this individual and this institution represented the mainstream nationalism, जो कि liberal perspective. ठीक है, वो हम आगे criticism में देखेंगे. But when you talk about Phule, you are going to mention this. Similarly, PSIR in southern part of India, he is also talking about the similar thing. He is first focusing on the fault lines in the society and therefore saying until as these fault lines close, these gaps close, India will not emerge as a nation. Maximum space within Dalit perspective has to be given to Ambedkar for all obvious reasons. Okay. Now, Ambedkar also starts with this premise that India is not a nation. He says that India is made up of two nations, the enlightened India and ostracized India. Enlightened India, Prabuddha Bharat, upper caste, and an India which he calls as Bahishkrit Bharat. Now, when अभी हम Indian national movement के perspective पे नहीं गए, अभी तो he is just talking about India and he is not ready to accept India as a nation. And he says that it is two country actually, Bahishkrit Bharat and Prabuddha Bharat, divided across caste. And then he says that Indian national movement is a narrative created by Indian National Congress and Gandhi. He says that there is a paradox, there is an irony in the Indian national movement that is being run by Gandhi and Congress. And that irony is that Congress is talking about freedom from external forces, but what about the freedom from the caste? And therefore he talks about annihilation of caste. Again, after that you will be talking about his criticism of Gandhi when he says that Gandhi is more concerned about the upper caste, he is not concerned about the depressed classes. Now this is the main framework which represents the Dalit perspective. This is what actually Dalit perspective said on Indian national movement. They are not ready to accept it as a national movement. Here you can bring in Granville Austin. Granville Austin said that Indian national movement was two movements going parallelly. One movement which had the objective of national independence and the other movement which had the objective of social freedom. So he says that it was not one movement, it was two movements going on parallel. And this way you can acknowledge that it was having various perspectives. Now you will start criticizing, because the question is also asking about critically examine this. And in order to criticize or in order to show the counter arguments, you can refer to cultural nationalist perspective represented by Tagore and Aurobindo Ghosh. Aurobindo Ghosh used to say that India has been a nation since thousands of years. So it's not because of Congress or because of the Britishers that India is a nation. So cultural nationalist perspective. Okay. Similarly, in modern times, you can also talk about the opinion of scholars like Arun Shourie, who in his book Worshipping False God says that Ambedkar and the Dalit perspective was opportunist. They participated, they were on the side of Britishers, and when India got independence, they participated in the Constituent Assembly. And therefore it says that worshipping Ambedkar and the Dalit perspective is like worshipping the false god. कुछ criticism आप लिखेंगे. Now this question is on Dalit perspective. You cannot leave this question by just criticizing. There has to be a defense. Now these are the ideal ways. हो सकता है इतना time मिले नहीं exam में, but ideally you should close this particular argument by putting a defense for the Dalit perspective, which can be represented by any Dalit scholar, be it Kanchai Laya or Professor Gopal Guru, or it can be any other scholar, जिससे आप defense कराएंगे. And what will be the defense? That be it Phule, Periyar or Ambedkar, they were the organic intellectuals of their community, and therefore they thought from that particular perspective. And from their perspective, when they looked at the national movement, they saw more of the caste fault lines than the Indian national movement. And in the end, the same conclusion, that the nature of Indian national movement is so comprehensive that it is difficult to understand it just from one perspective. Now, if you write all these things, यहाँ पे आपने start किया है India as a concept of nation state. You can refer to Shashi Tharoor's statement, in fact, which he says that India has been a nation since millennia. Then you have talked about the colonial perspective. Then you have talked about the Dalit perspective. उसमें आपने तीन main scholars leaders की बात की है. Then you have given the counter argument. Then you have given the defense, and then a conclusion. So ideally, this kind of answers will form a model answer. When you refer to even toppers copy, they are not able to accommodate all of them for obvious reason, क्योंकि उतना space और time होता नहीं. ठीक है. So there you are barely surviving. I'll show you I have some of the copies of the toppers. So इसमें से कुछ ही वो लिख पा रहे हैं, क्योंकि जितना उस समय याद आए लिख सकते. But if you make this answer beforehand and if you are just writing it there, it will be much easier for you. ठीक है. तो इसको एक बार लिखेंगे कि what can be a model answer for this. ठीक है. Right. The concept of India as a nation, and the legitimacy of Indian national movement has been contested from different perspectives. ठीक है. Next paragraph. While Shashi Tharoor in his book An Era of Darkness establishes the identity of India as a nation, referring Rig Veda wherein the notion of Bharatvarsh, notion of Bharatvarsh relates to the land stretching between Himalayas and the seas. Next paragraph. However, the colonialist perspective rejected the idea of India as a nation, James Mill, in his book, The History of British India, divides Indian history on communal lines. ठीक? When he says that ancient India belonged to Hindus and medieval India belonged to Muslims. ठीक है? So basically they are trying to question the legitimacy of India as a nation. ठीक है? In this only. Similarly, Winston Churchill referred to India as merely a geographical expression. Next paragraph. On similar lines, even the Dalit perspective तो ये जो connecting words use किया जा रहा है ना, however, on the other hand, on similar lines, this is how you maintain the connect between paragraphs. So आपको लगेगा you are reading an essay, otherwise one paragraph will be different than the other. So if you practice this in a manner, वो फिर it will come into the habit. Okay. So on similar lines, even Dalit, क्या लिखा Dalit perspective questions the legitimacy of India as a nation and Indian nationalism. Right. The Dalit perspective is represented by leaders like Mahatma Phule and Ambedkar. Mahatma Phule and Ambedkar in Maharashtra, comma, E.V. Ramaswamy Nayakar, Swami Nayakar in Tamil Nadu, comma, Narayan Guru in Kerala, comma, Bhagya Reddy Verma, Bhagya Reddy Verma in Andhra region, Mangu Ram in Punjab, Mangu Ram in Punjab, and Achyutanand in United Province. Next paragraph. Granville Austin rightly observes. Granville Austin rightly observes in his book The Indian Constitution, cornerstone of a nation. The Indian Constitution, semicolon, a colon, जो होता है colon, cornerstone of a nation. That Indian national movement had two revolutions going parallel. Dash national revolution against colonial rule and social revolution against medievalism. Medievalism. Next paragraph. Mahatma Phule in his book Gulam Giri has challenged the concept of nationalism and calls it a form of Brahmanism. For him, For him, there cannot be a nation unless all the people are included. Next paragraph. Similarly, PSIR leads the self-respect movement rejecting Brahmanism and the domination of upper caste in Congress and also in the national movement. Next paragraph. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar can be considered as the organic intellectual of the Dalit community who highlights the paradox of Gandhian movement. For him, India is not a nation. Rather community of communities. It consists of both Prabuddha Bharat, enlightened India, Prabuddha Bharat, and Bahishkrit Bharat. According to Ambedkar, Indian national movement would result into Indians entering into life of contradictions. That is democracy in political life, without social economic democracy. Therefore, like Phule, even Ambedkar prefers British Raj over Peshwa Raj. So this is the major Dalit perspective which has come now. Now, in the limited space that you'll have to give the counter arguments. Dalit perspective का criticism देना होगा. Next paragraph है. However, the Dalit perspective has been criticized by cultural nationalists like Aurobindo Ghosh, who considered nationalism as the new religion for Indian youth. From this perspective, India has been a nation in bracket right Bharat Mata since eternity, since the beginning of time, since eternity. Next paragraph. Rightist scholars like Arun Shourie in his book titled Worshipping False God, has called Dalit perspective led by Ambedkar as opportunist and anti-national. Next paragraph. However, it must be understood that Phule, Periyar, Ambedkar in Gramscian term were organic intellectuals. These people in Gramscian term were organic intellectuals of the Dalit community trying to generate counter hegemony, trying to generate counter hegemony against caste domination. Therefore, their politics as argued by Professor, therefore their politics as argued by Professor Gopal Guru should be understood in different context. Next paragraph. To conclude, we can say that in order to understand the comprehensive nature of the Indian national movement, one has to refer to different political perspectives, including Dalit. 4 पेज में गया कि 5 पेज में? 5 पेज, 2.5 में ही खत्म हो गया, मतलब 20 मार्कर में फिट हो जाएगा ना? हाँ, तो 2 स्कॉलर्स लिख दो ना, इसमें चलेगा। Actually, what I suggest is that it is important to reach to the 4th page, because if you fill the entire 4 pages, first of all, time आपको ज़्यादा लगेगा. Secondly, even the evaluator gets bored reading 4 pages. So after reading 2.5 pages, he has understood that what is the level of your answer in there. Okay. Now, what I suggest is that in a 4-page answer, just conclude on the 4th page. In a just conclusion on the 4th page. In a 3-page answer, write 2.5 pages. In a 2-page answer, definitely all the pages have to be filled. Okay. So if you इसको डिपेंड करेगा, यदि 10 मार्कर है तो और शॉर्ट, 10 मार्कर है तो सीधे फिर दलित पर्सपेक्टिव पे जाएंगे आप, वो जो इनिशियली केवल एक पैराग्राफ की द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ इंडिया एज अ नेशन एंड नेशनलिज्म हैज बीन अ कंटेस्टेड कॉन्सेप्ट. Okay, or maybe if colonialist perspective, बस एक लाइन से रेफर कर रहे हैं, directly you will be going to the Dalit perspective and then the later part. If it is a 20 marker, then the full thing can be replicated. Okay. Now write another question. Analyze the Marxist perspective. Analyze the Marxist perspective of the nature of इंडियन नेशनल मूवमेंट। ठीक है, इसको भी 20 मार्कर अज्यूम कर। अब इन द लास्ट क्वेश्चन दैट वी रोट एक्चुअली, if there was space and time we could have referred to more contemporary scholars, जैसे कि नोट्स में हमने गेल ऑम्वेट को रेफर किया है, रंजीत गुहा को रेफर किया है, वेलेरियन रॉड्रिक्स को रेफर किया है, एस एन गायकवाड को रेफर किया है. So all these are the contemporary scholars, but everything depends upon the time and space. यहाँ पे उतना ज़्यादा space नहीं था, so we skip that particular battery of scholars. यदि रहता तो हम लिख देते. यदि if we are just writing just on the Dalit perspective, not referring to anything else, then they can be accommodated. Now when we talk about this particular question, again there is a question, Marxist understanding of India's freedom movement of the same nature, 2013 and 2021, the Marxist understanding of Indian national movement. Now when you approach this question here also,
Sir.
Introduction can be the same.
So what is meant by Dalit scholar? That means who once come from Dalit community or who writes about Dalit community?
Who are writing on this particular issue and who are in favor of the Dalit interpretation of it. For example, we have referred in class to Kancha Ilaya many times. Professor
That's what I am asking.
Gail Omwet is not a Dalit, but she writes from that particular perspective. And Christophe Jefflot has many in many of his writings he has written from that particular perspective. So it is not related to caste, it is related to the field of writing and what is the texture of writing, in favor or against. For example, Arun Shourie ko we cannot say Dalit scholar because he is writing against that particular.
Thank you, sir.
Now when we talk about the Marxist perspective, here also introduction will remain the same. क्योंकि एग्जाम में तो एक ही क्वेश्चन आएगा ना, either on any other perspective. So it can either be the idea of India, contested concept, or you can here also start from the colonialist perspective. That can be the starting point of it. Okay. An alternate way of starting can also be the liberal perspective. स्टार्टिंग पॉइंट वो होता है जहां से हम ब्रेक या फिर कंटिन्यूटी शो कर सकते हैं. जैसे यहाँ पे हमने कॉलोनियलिस्ट पर्सपेक्टिव से कंटिन्यूटी शो किया. यदि हम कल्चरल पर्सपेक्टिव को रेफर करते हैं, कल्चरल नेशनलिस्ट, तो पहले हम क्या बता देते हैं, दैट अरविंदो घोष, रविन्द्रनाथ टैगोर सेड दैट इंडिया एग्जिस्टेड सिंस 1000 years. But on the other hand, Dalit scholars say this. So we use that as the premise to start. So it can either be the colonialist or cultural nationalist or even the liberal perspective.
Excuse me, sir. सर जो आपने भी पिछला क्वेश्चन बताया है, इसमें सर एक मतलब सर एक यूपीएससी गाइडलाइन नोटिफिकेशन में सर मेड सुपरफिशियल नॉलेज. सर सिर्फ एक बात ये बता दो कि सर जो हम ये आपने कोई आंसर बताया, आपने बता दिया सर, ये तो मतलब एकदम करेक्ट हो गया. मतलब सर इसमें मेड सुपरफिशियल नॉलेज के हिसाब से क्या रहेगा इसमें?
सुपरफिशियल नॉलेज बेसिकली जो टर्म रेफर कर रहा है कि आप आंसर में सब्सटेंस नहीं डाल रहे हैं. मतलब बेसिकली इफ यू आर जस्ट राइटिंग एन आर्गुमेंट एंड नॉट सपोर्टिंग इट विद फैक्ट. जैसे दो लाइंस हो सकते हैं ना कि इंडिया इज अ फेडरल कंट्री, ओके, एंड देन इंडिया इज अ फेडरल कंट्री, यू कैन रेफर टू आर्टिकल 1 और यू कैन रेफर टू सुप्रीम कोर्ट जजमेंट इन एसआर बोमई केस. फेडरलिज्म को बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर बताया गया. तो दीज आर टू आर्गुमेंट्स. एक कहना है कि इंडिया इज अ सेक्युलर कंट्री, दूसरा इंडिया इज अ सेक्युलर कंट्री आप प्रियम्बल को रेफर कर रहे हैं, आप आर्टिकल 25 28 को रेफर कर रहे हैं. ठीक है. सो हियर यू आर ट्राइंग टू सपोर्ट योर आंसर विद फैक्ट. एक सेंटेंस आप बोल रहे हैं कि आफ्टर कोल्ड वॉर इंडियाज रिलेशन विद यूएस हैज इंप्रूव्ड. दिस इज वन सेंटेंस. इन द अदर you are writing that if you are saying this, then what is the basic of that? We have signed foundational agreements, trade बढ़ा है, US has been supporting us on different international platforms.
सर आपने भी दलित पर्सपेक्टिव बताया, इसमें क्या मेड सुपरफिशियल नॉलेज होगी? मतलब आपने ये तो सर फैक्ट्स के हिसाब से बता दिया दलित पर्सपेक्टिव में. अगर हम सुपरफिशियल नॉलेज देखते तो क्या रहेगा सर उसमें?
ये तुम बोल रहे कि इस आंसर का सुपरफिशियल
यस
वर्जन क्या रहेगा?
यस सर.
ये सारे स्कॉलर्स का नाम नहीं रहेगा वहां पे. यहाँ पे जैसे कि मैंने ग्रैनविल ऑस्टिन नाम लिखा है
जी,
उनकी किताब का नाम लिखा है, उनका आर्ग्यूमेंट लिखा है. अरुण शौरी उनकी किताब का नाम, उनका आर्ग्यूमेंट. सो इफ दीज नेम्स एंड दीज रेफरेंसेस आर नॉट रिटन, तो वो सुपरफिशियल हुआ।
सर मतलब अगर अपन इसको एनोनिमस बना देते हैं तो वो सुपरफिशियल हो जाते हैं।
जब आप देयर इज नो सब्सटेंशियल फैक्ट टू सपोर्ट इट, देन इट बिकम्स अ सुपरफिशियल आंसर, जिसको कि जनरलिस्ट आंसर बोलते हैं, वेरी जनरल आंसर उस टाइप।
ओके सर।
जीएस और इन आईजीपी सेक्शन जीएस और पॉल साइंस में बस इतना डिफरेंस है दैट यहाँ पे हम थियरी रेफर करते हैं। जैसे यहाँ पे हमने यूज किया ग्रामसियन टर्म, ग्रामसियन आप जीएस में नहीं यूज करेंगे है ना, चाहे आप हिस्ट्री में। दूसरा, हियर वी रेफर टू द स्कॉलर्स। ओके, जैसे हमने यहाँ पे गे लॉम्बेट का यूज कर सकते थे, अरुण शौरी का नाम प्रोफेसर गोपाल गुरु का यूज किया। वी कैन नॉट यूज these names in GS. There, only those scholars who are like really famous, Ivor Jennings Way, Granville Austin, वहां भी हम यूज कर सकते हैं, ठीक है, बट नॉट दोज हु आर वेरी नीश स्कॉलर, जो कि एक पॉलिटिकल साइंस ग्रेजुएट को ही पता हो। इतना चलेगा, हाँ बिल्कुल चलेगा, लिख सकते हैं, ठीक है। So Marxist perspective, introduction will be like this, here also conclusion will be the same. Now when we talk about the Marxist perspective, here you'll be referring to some of the scholars like starting point can be M.N. Roy himself. Okay, you can refer to Rajni Palm Dutt, you can refer to A.R. Desai, you can refer to सुमित सरकार, you can refer to बिपिन चंद्रा, ठीक है। आप रोमिला थापर का बहुत सारे स्कॉलर्स हैं जिसका आप नाम का यूज कर सकते हैं। बट इफ there are limited number of scholars that you have to use, I would say that write the arguments of M.N. Roy, Rajni Palm Dutt, A.R. Desai, and the arguments of Sumit Sarkar and Vipin Chandra. Now, why I have separated their arguments into categorization? Because their arguments is typically extreme Marxist in its outlook. Extreme Marx, एकदम जो क्लास कॉन्फ्लिक्ट की बात करता है, इकोनॉमिक डिटर्मिनिज्म की बात करता है, while सुमित सरकार and बिपिन चंद्रा, they are more careful in their analysis. Especially if you talk about Bipin Chandra, we see two kind of writings and evolution in the writings of Bipin Chandra. In earlier days, Bipin Chandra is also the conventional Marxist scholar. He is saying that it was a class conflict movement and abhi dekhenge detail. But in his later writings, he is more balanced in his approach. More balanced in the sense he says that Indian national movement was not just for the purpose of benefiting the capitalist, but somehow the method that was used fitted into the design of the capitalist, and that's why gradation of scholars can be used. Here also, after talking about the Marxist perspective, बाकी के perspective से आप compare कर सकते, जैसे you can compare from Marxist perspective, you can compare with even the Dalit perspective. You can show the similarity. दोनों perspective ये मानता था कि India is not a nation, right? Both agreed to this fact that there is an exploitation. एक कहता है कि कास्ट के बेसिस पे, दूसरा कह रहा है क्लास के बेसिस पे, बट एक्सप्लॉयटेशन है. Both are saying that Indian National Congress is not a party of all Indians. एक कह रहा है कि अपर कास्ट की पार्टी है, दूसरा कह रहा है अपर क्लास की पार्टी. बट गांधी, both are saying Gandhi is not a leader for all community. One is saying of upper caste, second is saying of upper class. So this is the similarity. But there's a difference also. Dalit perspective never talked about use of violence. Ambedkar ने कभी violence का use नहीं. Ambedkar said it is the constitution. But Marxist perspective will go back to the principle of Marx that any revolution cannot be brought without violence. Secondly, the Dalit perspective was in favor of British rule, because they believe that when Britishers are here, they are ensuring equality before law. and if Britishers are not there, there would be the same caste domination. But Marxists would not even support British rule, because British rule is being fueled by capitalist tendencies. और उनके हिसाब से imperialism is the manifestation of class conflict at international level. जैसे capitalist workers domestically exploitation हो रहा है, similarly the colonial countries, they are exploiting these countries like India, and the same thing is continued. So similarity difference आप बता सकते हैं, and then you can always compare with the cultural nationalist perspective, liberal perspective. It will depend upon कि कितना space and time आपके पास available. The majority focus and the main thing over which the marking would happen will be this particular part. So if I have to give mark on this particular question, out of let us say 10 marks, 70% I would dedicate, or at least 60% I would dedicate to only the main demand of the question. Okay, 10% each to conclusion and introduction, and rest 20% I would see that how many dimensions you have added. Because as I said, sometimes you read a 20 mark question, अपना आंसर खुद पढ़िएगा 4 पेज का. If you start reading first page, second page, third page जाते जाते आप केवल दलित पर्सपेक्टिव की बात करेंगे, sorry Marxist perspective, you'll get bored of that. You want to look at different perspective. I will show you one answer of Swati Sharma this year, country IS 304, that how she has changed from one perspective to another in just next paragraph, because, and that is also on a 10 mark question or 15 mark question, because it is important. The reason is आपको एक question मिलेगा. On the perspective of Indian national movement, there will be one question only, and it is an opportunity to tell to this evaluator that other than this you are also having knowledge of other perspectives. So rather than going monochromatically in one direction, you can write a comprehensive answer for this. Now when you are going to approach the main demand of this question, now the basic premise is that like Dalit perspective, even Marxist perspective do not believe in India as a nation. इनका एनालिसिस एक स्टेप पहले से स्टार्ट होता है. फॉर दैट मैटर दे डोंट बिलीव इन द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ नेशनहुड. ऐसा नहीं कि इंडिया एज अ नेशन, दे डोंट बिलीव. मार्क्सिस्ट बिलीव दैट नेशन इज एन आर्टिफिशियल कॉन्सेप्ट डेवलप्ड बाय द कैपिटलिस्ट टू मैक्सिमाइज देयर प्रॉफिट. बिकॉज लेट अस से इफ दिस इज द वर्ल्ड, ठीक है, यहां पे कोई नेशन नहीं रहता, नो बैरियर्स. Maybe a capitalist sitting here, a capitalist sitting here, 4 corners. Their profit can be maximized if they will divide this world into 4 countries. इसका यहाँ पे hegemony रहेगा, यहाँ पे. So it is going to maximize their profit. For example, when Pakistan is created, so if you ask this question that why Pakistan was created from a Marxist, he would say that in the northwestern part of India and in the eastern part of India, there were certain capitalists who wanted to maximize their profit, and therefore they created this particular country. क्योंकि हो सकता है कि वो जो लाहौर वाला रीजन है वहां का किसी कैपिटलिस्ट के लिए डिफिकल्ट था to maintain his hegemony in business and let us say in Chennai, and therefore he supported the idea of creating a smaller nation wherein he will be the prime owner of that particular. तो उनका ये explanation. So they don't believe in a nation, concept of nation, and therefore India को भी वो nation नहीं मानते. Now the Marxist analysis, मैंने बोला M.N. Roy से शुरू होगा यहाँ पे, but you can also go backward and refer to the analysis by Karl Marx himself, who analyzed the first war of Indian independence 1857 and said that it was not the first war of Indian independence. It was some feudal lords fighting for their own particular territory. And that is the reason the revolt failed. Had there been a concept of nation, maybe it would have succeeded. And it was true also. The concept of nation was not there. सबकी जिनकी territory खतरे में थी वो साथ में आए. So his analysis is it was purely a class conflict. It was a fight between local capitalism and international capitalism. So international capitalism को refer कर रहा है British Empire, and local capitalism को refer कर रहे हैं ये जो लैंडलॉर्ड्स. Then M.N. Roy, the 3 scholars I said, M.N. Roy, then Rajni Pamdat and A.R. Desai. They are extreme in their analysis because they say that Indian national movement was controlled by capitalists. It was controlled by capitalists. And why do they say, why are they saying that? Because they say, look at the method that these Indian leaders are using. They are using method of non-violence, because non-violence always fits into the design of a capitalist. कोई भी capitalist, कोई भी businessman कभी नहीं चाहेगा कि violence हो, because that is disrupting his business. And in fact, they have also looked at movement like Swadeshi movement as a capitalist movement. स्वदेशी मूवमेंट क्या था? फॉरेन गुड्स को नहीं चाहिए अब. इनका ये कहना था कि दिस वाज द मूवमेंट फ्यूल्ड बाय द लोकल कैपिटलिस्ट. यदि फॉरेन गुड नहीं आएगा तो लोग कहाँ का गुड खरीदेंगे? कपड़ा यदि आप बाहर का नहीं खरीदेंगे तो कपड़ा आप इंडियन बिजनेसमैन का खरीदेंगे. हु इज गोइंग टू बेनिफिट? द लोकल बिजनेस. So एकदम typically, it may be right, it may be wrong, but it is typical Marxist perspective. They say that Gandhi was following the design of capitalist, and that's why whenever the movement reached at a point wherein the masses would have captured the movement, चौरी चौरा, Gandhi would withdraw. Marx क्या बोलता है कि आपका जो the awareness, the consciousness should be such that you enter into revolution, but ऐसा movement जब भी आता है, Gandhi will withdraw the movement. And Indian National Congress and Gandhi, they are using masses for their political benefit. Participate कौन कर रहा है? Masses. फायदा किसको हो रहा है? Indian National Congress leaders को. So basically एक जो कहा जाता है struggle to struggle, Gandhian movement का, इन्होंने कहा no, it is a kind of compromise struggle. So they are fighting and then they are reaching the compromise. क्या compromise? कुछ सीट्स आपको मिल गई स्टेट असेंबली में, कुछ सीट्स मिल गई नेशनल असेंबली, आप compromise कर रहे हैं. And even Gandhi, who is considered as a mass leader, definitely is a mass leader because he is being supported by mass, but he is not giving the control of the movement to the masses, and therefore he cannot be called as a true mass. ये इनका understanding है, typically Marxist. Then the second and a more moderate version of Marxist analysis will come from the Bipin Chandra and the Sumit Sarkar. इनका ये कहना है कि it was not by choice that the Indian national movement was capitalist, but it was just a coincidence that the method they adopted and the interest of the capitalists, it matched. So we should not be blaming Gandhi for that. We should not be blaming Indian National Congress for that. But yes, it is true that the control of the movement was in the hand of upper class. Only upper class benefited. Lower classes just participated in that movement. And this is reflecting in the composition of the Constituent Assembly. यदि सबके लिए होता तो Constituent Assembly में domination किसका था? Upper class का. So it would have been the equal distribution there also, and that's why they make such claims. And the criticism मैंने बताया will be the same, cultural nationalist and liberal criticism. ठीक है, तो just write this. इसमें अभी introduction नहीं लिखेंगे, सीधे will come to the Marxist.
अब जब सर स्कॉलर याद ही नहीं रहेगा तो सर ऐसे लिख सकते हैं?
अब नहीं याद रहेगा तो लिखना ही पड़ेगा, लिखना पड़ेगा फ्रॉम मार्क्सिस्ट पर्सपेक्टिव. ठीक है, तो वे आउट तो हर चीज का है ना. मतलब यदि ये नहीं पता रहे कि किताब है कि आर्टिकल है तो इन हिज वर्क लिख देंगे, इन हिज वर्क दिस. यदि न किताब का नाम ही नहीं पता रहेगा तो केवल स्कॉलर लिखेंगे. स्कॉलर का भी नहीं नाम पता रहेगा तो जिस आइडियोलॉजी से बिलोंग करता है वो आइडियोलॉजी लिख देंगे फ्रॉम मार्क्सिस्ट आइडियोल पर्सपेक्टिव, और वो भी नहीं याद रहेगा तो फ्रॉम वन पर्सपेक्टिव while the other. But what I am saying is कि ऐसा होना चाहिए. ठीक है, अदरवाइज वो बोल रहे थे सुपरफिशियल वाला वैसा आंसर हो. ठीक है, चल राइट राइट. From Marxist perspective, a nation A nation is an imagined community, created by capitalists for maximizing their profit. In bracket, write the name Benedict Anderson. Right. Even the Marxist analysis of Indian national movement questions the legitimacy of India as a nation. And therefore, the Indian national movement next paragraph. The Marxist analysis is rooted in the class approach followed by Karl Marx himself, who analyzed India's first war of independence and called it revolt by feudal elements. For Marxists, nationalism is an upper class ideology. Next paragraph. Extreme Marxist analysis focusing on the class character of the movement can be found in the works of M.N. Roy, Rajni Palm Dutt, and A.R. Desai. A.R. Desai. However, next paragraph में, however, scholars like Bipin Chandra, Sumit Sarkar, Romila Thapar, are more liberal in their approach. Next paragraph. M.N. Roy, in his book India in Transition, M.N. Roy in his book India in Transition argued that the political ideology of nationalism being followed by Congress and Gandhi represents the interest of bourgeois class. स्पेलिंग अपने से लिख लो जो भी हिसाब से लग रहा है, हमको भी आज तक bourgeois का स्पेलिंग नहीं है, ठीक है, पढ़ने वाला भी ऐसे करके कुछ लेना पता नहीं चलेगा. नेक्स्ट पैराग्राफ. आरपी दत्त, नेक्स्ट पैराग्राफ. आरपी दत्त in his book India Today, called Indian National Congress, the initiative of Viceroy. वही सेफ्टी वाल्व थ्योरी जो कहा जाता है. To protect the interest of British rule in India. He calls Gandhi as right inverted comma, the mascot of the bourgeois. Mascot, who represents the mascot of MASCOT, mascot of the bourgeois, who would withdraw the movement, the bourgeois, who would withdraw the movement when masses are about to transform from class in itself to मार्क्स क्या टर्म यूज करता है? क्लास फॉर इटसेल्फ, क्लास इन इटसेल्फ टू क्लास फॉर इटसेल्फ. एक्चुअली यहाँ पे ये भी लिखा जा सकता था कि व्हेन मासेस आर गोइंग टू बिकम कंप्लीटली अवेयर, बट इन ईच सेंटेंस जस्ट थिंक कि पॉलिटिकल साइंस का कौन सा शब्द यहाँ पे लाया जा सकता है. ओके, इन फैक्ट देयर वाज नो नीड टू यूज द टर्म ग्राम्सियन देयर, वो कम्युनिटी लीडर भी बोला जा सकता था, लेकिन डेलिबरेटली वो चीज लाई गई सो दैट यू कैन गेट इट, यू कैन अंडरलाइन इट, एंड दिस इज हाउ यू यूज द टर्मिनोलॉजीज एंड दिस विल यू विल डेवलप. एक कोई भी सेंटेंस आप अपना लिखने जा रहे हैं, आप सोचिए कि इसमें पॉलिटिकल साइंस का कौन सा शब्द यहाँ पे आ सकता है. तो क्लास कॉन्फ्लिक्ट, ठीक है, इकोनॉमिक डिटर्मिनिज्म, ये ऐसे शब्द हैं जो कि ओनली अ पॉलिटिकल साइंस ग्रेजुएट वुड नो. So try to bring it more and more and then we'll highlight. If you refer to the copies of this year rank 15 Kunal Rastogi, he has used more and more such terms and he has very, जहां भी आया उसको अंडरलाइन कर लो, बस सिंपल सा वही चीज. बिकॉज आंसर्स जब आप पढ़ोगे तो आंसर पढ़ के ऐसा नहीं लगता है कि आंसर हम लिख नहीं पाएंगे. The thing is, the only thing is when you actually practically sit to write, lot of the words which you know get skipped from the mind. So in Shabdu ko lana and then underline it. Take class for itself. Next paragraph. Right. We can refer to the writings of A.R. Desai, A.R. Desai, who has analyzed various stages of the movement, and concluded that the masses were used but not given leadership. In his book Social Background of Indian Nationalism, he has particularly called the Gandhian methods of satyagrah and non-violence as capitalist methods. He refers to the concept of substitutionism given by V.I. Pavlov and concludes that Indian National Congress substituted Indian masses. ठीक है, तो जो लेनिन ने कॉन्सेप्ट दिया कि there will be communist party, Marx said that it would be masses who are going to transform themselves from class in itself to class for itself. But Lenin said कि ऐसा कभी नहीं होगा, and therefore he is bringing in the concept of communist parties. Now these communist party are going to make the revolution possible. But what actually happened, that the masses were replaced by communist party. Communist party was replaced by the Politburo, the core committee, and the core committee was replaced by the dictator. जैसे आप चाइना के एग्जांपल में देखेंगे, तो जो वहाँ पे कम्युनिस्ट चाइनीज पार्टी है, actually that represents what masses, but masses are not empowered. The party is empowered, within party Politburo is empowered, and within Politburo one person, the president there, he is empowered. Now the same concept he is deriving in case of India and says that in India masses were replaced by the Congress party. Congress party was replaced by the core committee, and core committee, the Congress working committee, and the Congress working committee basically was represented by leaders like Gandhi and Nehru. So the same thing followed here. So when they are looking from their perspective, unko national movement ऐसा दिखता है.
Sir, according to RP, that Indian National Congress is the initiative of Viceroy to protect the interest of British. How, what arguments he has given, how it creating a party in India itself by the Indian leaders will serve the interest of the British.
Safety valve theory दी गई, that Britishers themselves wanted Congress to be established, so that if there is any kind of resistance against the Britishers, that must be channelized through the Congress party. And if it would be channelized through the Congress party, a compromised solution would be given. So it will not result into the kind of scene that we saw in 1857, that all people, they started revolting against the crown, against the British. So it will channelize their energy into one particular format, and this format is already compromised. So safety valve theory जो दिया जाता है.
Is there any connection between 1855 organization of Congress and 1857 Indian Revolt, first independence revolt?
There is no connection as such, but this is the explanation given, safety valve, that it was, see, there is something called fact. Fact is never contested. But when you look into the history and then you start imagining that what could have resulted into this, then you go into that sphere of imagination. Yes, very often we say that if Nehru would not have taken Kashmir to UN, then this would have happened. But nobody can tell for certainty that this was the case. Okay, so this is one of the theories which is often given, that why Congress was established, because it was initially, it was the effort of Englishmen only. AOU.
Thank you, sir.
Now just write the next paragraph. However, some Marxist scholars,
Excuse me, sir.
इसको लिखिए उसको. Some Marxist scholars like Bipin Chandra and Sumit Sarkar have argued that the Indian national movement led by Gandhi was not a capitalist movement, but a true Gramscian movement. A true Gramscian movement. Gramsci. True Gramscian movement. This is so because Congress and Gandhi helped in developing counter hegemony against the British rule. Now why Gramscian movement? क्योंकि दो स्टेज में गांधीयन मूवमेंट था. Initially Gandhi is saying no violence, but in 1942 he says do or die. So how can a person like Gandhi, who supports non-violence, can say do or die? He is saying go for violence, because Gandhi, in the opinion of scholars, he was a strategist, and he very well knew that when the ball is in own court and when he can go for the offensive. Now why in 1922 he is deciding to withdraw the movement? Why earlier he is deciding? Because he know that at this point of time people are not aware. But in 1942, once he realized that the Britishers are at their weakest point, Indian people are aware, and therefore he say do or die. Gramsci क्या कहता है? Unlike Marx कहता है there will be one revolution, the violent revolution. Gramsci says there will be two revolutions. Initially a counter hegemony has to be developed, and then of course there will be one violent move. So war of positions, war of maneuver. So what Gandhi was doing initially was actually he was fighting the war of position, and 1942 onwards the war of maneuver. So initially these scholars are saying capitalist, now it's a Gramscian movement. In fact, Bipin Chandra says that anywhere in the world, if Gramscian movement have been practically shown in the world, it is just the Gandhian movement. And across the world, movements went out of the control. It was the Indian national movement that for a very long period of time it remained a non-violent and controlled movement. अब फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन की बात करें, चाइनीज रेवोल्यूशन की बात करें, हर जगह it became violent, it went out of the control, but it remained under the control. So this is the Marxist analysis. बाकी criticism वही सारे लगेंगे. कल्चरल नेशनलिस्ट का क्रिटिसिज्म लगेगा, आप सिमिलरिटी लिख सकते हैं इनसे चीज. कितने पेज में हो ये? कितने? एक पेज में हो गया ना. तो बाकी इंट्रोडक्शन और बाकी के डायमेंशंस लगाओगे तो हाँ ठीक है
सर.
हो जाता है. हाँ
सर अभी आपने एक पर्सपेक्टिव बताया था मार्क्सिस्ट का, दैट 1857 इज नॉट फर्स्ट वर्ल्ड वॉर इन, इट्स अ वॉर बिटवीन फ्यूडल लॉर्ड्स एंड दैट. सर इसमें मतलब ऐसा क्यों, इसको कोई किसी ने क्रिटिसाइज नहीं करा? क्योंकि सर जो भी है फर्स्ट वॉर ऑफ इंडिपेंडेंस हुई थी, इसमें तो सर बहुत सारी मूवमेंट्स थी, जैसे लोटस की थी और रोटी वाली थी, तो सर बहुत सारे मासेस का सपोर्ट था. और अगर फ्यूडल लॉर्ड्स की देखी जाए तो सर उनको भी तो बहुत सारे मासेस का सपोर्ट था. जैसे एक बंदा आया था, एक बंदे को दिल्ली गया, दिल्ली के बाद सर उसको पूरी लीडरशिप वगैरह सब मिल गई. तो सर ऐसा मतलब क्यों हुआ, इसको क्रिटिसाइज नहीं किया किसी ने?
बिल्कुल क्रिटिसिज्म होगा. क्रिटिसिज्म ही तो बोल रहा हूँ. इसके बाद अब क्रिटिसिज्म ही तो लिखना है, या तो मैं वही सारा क्रिटिसिज्म फिर से लिखवा दूं. एनी पर्सपेक्टिव, कोई गांधीयन पर्सपेक्टिव भी क्रिटिसाइज होता है. तो नोबडी सेइंग, अभी तक जो मैंने लिखा है ये मार्क्सिस्ट पर्सपेक्टिव है. The criticism of which will come from cultural nationalists, from liberals, even Dalits भी criticize करेंगे क्योंकि Marxist violence को support कर रहे हैं. तो of course the criticism would be there. बिना criticize के कैसे हो सकता है?
And sir, what is the difference between war of position and maneuver?
War of position is when you are trying to develop the counter hegemony. ठीक है. And war of maneuver is that when you are finally going for the final revolt. जैसे कि मार्क्स बताता था वायलेंट रेवोल्यूशन की बात कर. ग्रामसी वाला टॉपिक पढ़ा है ना?
यस सर.
तो मार्क्स ने कहा था कि देयर विल बी मूवमेंट ऑफ हिस्ट्री लाइक दिस. एक्सप्लॉयटेशन है, डिक्टेटरशिप ऑफ प्रोलेटेरियस, अल्टीमेटली कम्युनिज्म. बट ऐसा हुआ नहीं. एंड व्हेन ग्रामसी इज लुकिंग इनटू दिस क्वेश्चन दैट इफ व्हाट मार्क्स सेड इज लॉजिकल, देन व्हाई कम्युनिज्म डिड नॉट कम. उल्टे देखने को मिल रहा है, फासिज्म आ गया. So he is looking into the recommendation of Karl Marx, और मुझे पता चला कि मार्क्स ने जो मॉडल बताया है, he has undermined the importance of the intellectual class, which is creating hegemony, and therefore before going for the final war, a counter hegemony has to be created, जिसको कि war of position बोलता है. So instead of 2-block model of Marx, he gives a 3-block model. ठीक जी सर. चलो एक क्वेश्चन अब तुम कर लो. किस किस चीज को ध्यान में हाईलाइट करना है, जहां भी कोई भी नाम आ रहा है, कोई टर्म आ रहा है, उसको हाईलाइट करना है. एनी नेम, एनी टर्मिनोलॉजी हैज टू बी हाईलाइटेड. बाकी ग्रामर को नहीं करना, मतलब हाउएवर एंड को ये सब. हाँ, तो बुक का नाम ही तो है, नाम में बुक का भी तो नाम आ गया. अब जस्ट देखो कुछ कॉपीज, you can download these copies, they are on the website. कहाँ से डाउनलोड करना है? इंस्टीट्यूट के वेबसाइट पे गो देयर, लॉग इन करो, डैशबोर्ड पे जाओ, टॉपर्स कॉपी मिलेगा. ठीक है. अब ये उत्कर्ष द्विवेदी की कॉपी है. कॉपी इसलिए सेलेक्ट किया गया है ताकि जिनकी राइटिंग्स खराब हो उनको थोड़ा कॉन्फिडेंस आ जाए. ठीक है, कि जब इनका 314 आ सकता है तो 315 बिल्कुल आ सकता है. चलो इंशाल्लाह. चलो, अब क्वेश्चन इज कंपेयर लिबरल पर्सपेक्टिव ऑन इंडियन नेशनल मूवमेंट विद दैट ऑफ द मार्क्सिस्ट पर्सपेक्टिव. तो अभी लिबरल पर्सपेक्टिव देखना है. बट इंट्रोडक्शन, द इंडियन नेशनल मूवमेंट was an inclusive movement of various classes. ठीक है. hegemonic school कौन है? and the movement has been analyzed from the different perspective. In this regard, the liberal perspective is hegemonic. The liberal perspective is talking about this. The liberal perspective realities contribution of the Congress and Gandhi in the freedom movement. Marxist perspective sees Congress as a representative of aspirational youthful bourgeois. M.N. Roy. R.P. Dutt, mascot of bourgeois. However, both the perspective fail to capture. और वही वाली बात है कि हमें बहुत सारे पर्सपेक्टिव चाहिए. 10 मार्कर है तो बहुत कुछ लिखा नहीं जा सका, बट इससे भी बेहतर लिखा जा सकता था. Isn't it? फॉर एग्जाम्पल, यदि आपको पता रहे कि जैसे ही मार्क्सिस्ट दिखा हमें एम एन रॉय, आर.पी. दत्त, ए.आर. देसाई, सुमित सरकार और बिपिन चंद्रा लिखना है, तो 2 पैराग्राफ में आप फोकस्ड होके लिख देंगे. सो दिस आंसर इज ऑल्सो शुड नॉट बी कंसिडर एज लाइक बहुत बेस्ट आंसर नहीं है, बट एक्चुअली एग्जाम में ऐसा ही आप लिख पाते हैं. ठीक है. तो इफ यू आर रेफरिंग टू दिस, एक्चुअल आउटपुट इज दिस दैट यू गेट. अगेन दिस इज कॉपी ऑफ रैंक 9 कनिका गोयल. What are the key points of Marxist historiography regarding nationalism? Nationalism is considered as the bourgeois doctrine. भाई बेनेडिक्ट एंडरसन का नाम लिखा जा सकता था यहाँ पे. Leninist theory of imperialism asks for the proletariat, for the colonies as well as the Western world to write against the capitalists. The Nationalist Party represented the Indian National Congress, bourgeois party, M.N. Roy. It is working in favor of the similar view was reflected by Rajni Palm Dutt in his book India Today, A.R. Desai, Social Background of Indian National Movement. आंसर में इतना ही जगह रहता है कि इतना ही लिख पाएंगे, नाम और स्कॉलर का नाम और बुक का नाम. However, सुमित सरकार डिफर्ड. यहाँ पे साथ में बिपिन चंद्रा का भी नाम आना चाहिए था. बिपिन डिफेंस आ गया. एंड देन नेशनलिज्म इज अ मेटा नैरेटिव. इसको एक पर्सपेक्टिव से समझाना डिफिकल्ट है. It should not happen. टेस्ट सीरीज में लिख देते हैं कोई, but actually it should not happen. Okay, again same Marxist perspective. This is copy of rank 48. In first paragraph, starting with it's a meta narrative. अलग अलग पर्सपेक्टिव से एक्सप्लेन करना होगा. नेशनलिस्ट हिस्टोरियंस, जो कि लिबरल पर्सपेक्टिव अभी हम देखेंगे, वो है. कल्चरल नेशनलिस्ट आ गया. क्विक चेंज इनटू द texture of the answer, cultural nationalist. Then coming to the Marxist perspective, okay, talking about the challenge, M.N. Roy, bourgeois movement, bourgeois leader. Okay, and then Gramscian school, Ranjit Guha. मैंने बोला कि we can also refer to the modern school, Ranjit Guha, and nationalist perspective. So आंसर्स आर वेरी, ऐसा नहीं है कि यू कैन नॉट राइट. ऐसा आंसर लिख ही सकते हो, इससे बेहतर लिख सकते हो. ओनली थिंग इज कि पहले से प्रिपेयर होके जाओगे तो सोचना नहीं पड़ेगा, तुरंत लिख दोगे. और जहां सोचना पड़ा वहां पे थोड़ा सा डाइल्यूट हो जाता है. ओके, legacy of the British. This copy I was referring of rank 15. So basically writing and underlining and all. हैंडराइटिंग खराब होना कोई गुनाह नहीं है यूपीएससी में, ठीक है. सब्सटेंस शुड बी देयर. इवैल्यूएटर पढ़ ले. And highlighting is very important, because if you don't highlight, he is not going to read each line. तो बेटर होगा कि आप लिखें, हाईलाइट कर दें. हैंडराइटिंग अच्छी है तो डेफिनेटली देयर इज एन एडवांटेज, डेफिनेटली, बिकॉज द फर्स्ट इंप्रेशन इज विद द हैंडराइटिंग ओनली. कॉपी खोलते ही मान के चलो अंतिम की कॉपी चेक कर रहे हैं, एकदम खत्म होने वाला है ऑफिस आर, और कॉपी खोलते ही कैसी हैंडराइटिंग मिलती है कि लगे कि ये किस स्क्रिप्ट में लिखी गई है. तो बट एनीवे दैट कैन नॉट बी चेंज. सब्सटेंस कैन एक्चुअली, ठीक है. क्या वो, चलो एक क्वेश्चन तुम लिखो फटाफट. राइट, आई थिंक दिस ऑल ऑफ यू कैन राइट. The making of Indian Constitution. Write a question. The making of Indian Constitution is described as an attempt towards social revolution. Comment. 15 मार्कर. ये टॉपिक हो गया है तुम्हारे भी क्लास में, ठीक है. तो 9 मिनट्स 10 मिनट्स मान के इसको लिखेंगे. 10 मिनट्स बाद में डिस्कस करो. प्रॉपर आंसर 10 मिनट्स 3 पेज में. अरे लिखो, क्या कर रहे हो साई, लिखो. ऐसा ही एक दिन आएगा जिसमें ऐसा ही क्वेश्चन लिखना रहेगा, सोचो कि उस दिन लिख लिया था. चलो लिखो. राइट, डिकेट नहीं करा रहे, तुम्हें लिखना है. 10 मिनट्स. चलो टाइम हो गया। लिख लिया? क्या हुआ? लिख लिया? थोड़ा बहुत लिखे हो? अरे कोई बात नहीं, टाइम नहीं मिला, रिवीजन का टाइम नहीं मिला। चलो ये आर्ग्यूमेंट हम एक्सेप्ट करते हैं कि टाइम नहीं मिला। बाकियों का कंप्लीट कर पाए? नहीं हो पाया, टाइम लगता है इसमें। हस्ती मल हस्ती का एक शेर है, इसमें कि नए परिंदों को उड़ने में वक्त लगता है, प्यार का पहला खत लिखने में वक्त लगता है। तो टाइम लगेगा, बट द इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग इज लिखना जरूरी है, बिकॉज थ्रू ऑल दीज बोरिंग प्रोसेस, ठीक है, somehow what motivates is very interesting, but what takes you there is very boring. ऐसे ही बोरिंग आंसर्स लिखने होंगे और उसी से ही चीज़ें होंगी, अदरवाइज तो फिर थोड़ा डिफिकल्ट हो सकता है। सबसे तो कौन क्या ये जस्टिफिकेशन यूपीएससी को दिया जा सकता है कि याद रहता तो लिख देते? नहीं, एक कजन है मेरा, हर एक परीक्षा देने के बाद बोलता है पेपर तो इतना आसान था ना कि कोई थोड़ा सा भी पढ़ ले तो क्रैक हो जाएगा। तो पढ़ो पढ़ो, है ना? तो ऐसे थोड़ी कह सकते कि याद रहे तो लिख देते, याद रहता तो सब लिख देते ना, याद करो उसको, दोनों चीज को पढ़ना है फिर लिखना है, ठीक है, अदरवाइज इट कैन बी प्रॉब्लम। एनीवे, अब ये चीज इसलिए बताई जा रही है ताकि संभल जाओ, नहीं तो फिर थोड़ी प्रॉब्लम हो सकती है। हुँ? कौन संभला है केवल बातों से? सभी को एक हादसा जरूरी है, हम नहीं चाहते हादसा हो, हादसा से पहले समझ लो। और आंसर्स काफी इन स्कोप है, यू पिकअप टॉपर्स कॉपी, सारे जीएस को पॉल साइंस के, दे आर वेरी मच इन स्कोप। ऐसा नहीं एक्सेप्शनल आंसर है, बट जो भी क्वालिटी है अक्रॉस है। जीएस में चारों पेपर एसे एंड पॉलिटिकल साइंस, सो इट्स नॉट दैट वेरी कंटेंट लेड एंड वेरी exceptional answers, but above average answers across the subjects. Anyway, so this question was Indian Constitution as a social document. Introduction क्या होना चाहिए? क्या लिखा साइल इंट्रोडक्शन? ठीक है, लेकिन पूरा ही इतना आ गया इंट्रोडक्शन, ठीक है। सो बेसिकली यू कैन स्टार्ट विथ दैट इंडियन नेशनल मूवमेंट हैड डुअल ऑब्जेक्टिव, ओके। लिख सकते हैं उसको, ठीक है। So basically you can start with the dual objective, that Indian national movement had dual objective. One objective, one common objective was national independence, and there were segmented social objectives. Or you can start with that Constituent Assembly was not operating in vacuum. It was aware about the fact that Indian society is not equal, and therefore the constitution which is being created has to take into account the social realities. Or the simplest introduction, if you don't remember anything, that Granville Austin calls Indian Constitution as a social document in his book The Indian Constitution, Cornerstone of the Nation. So you can start with any of these introduction, or you can even combine it also. Now the main demand of this question is that you will have to prove that Indian Constitution is a social document. And this you will prove through the provisions written in the Constitution and through the Supreme Court judgments. Then only you can get substance of it. Now, when you are proving that Indian Constitution is a social document, in fact, you can also refer to the opinion of Pratap Bhanu Mehta, who says that in rest of the countries, it was the revolution which led to the independence, or it was revolution which led to the constitution. But in India, it was constitution itself which was revolutionary. You can also start with the introduction given by Christopher Jeffrey Lott, that Indian Constitution being a social document has resulted into the silent revolution. Okay. So any of the introduction, कोई एकदम कोई particular introduction नहीं होता, it can be any of these. But the major focus has to be to prove that how Indian Constitution is a social document. Now here you can go the vulnerable section wise. सब आपको recognize करना पड़ेगा कि in Indian society who were the vulnerable sections and what were the provisions. Or you can divide it in a way that we have certain provisions in the Indian Constitution which talks about equality, and there are certain provisions which talks about positive discrimination, that is affirmative action. तो यहाँ पे आप क्लब कर देंगे the thing which is written in the preamble, which talks about the equality of status and opportunity, which talks about liberty, which talks about justice, social, economic and political. Then you can refer to fundamental rights, especially 15.1, 16.1, 17, which talks about equality. There should not be any kind of discrimination. You can also refer to the relevant provisions in DPSP, which says that equal pay for equal work. There should not be, कौन सा article? 39B है नहीं, 43 कौन सा है? हाँ 39B तो नहीं है, 39B तो अभी कल ही इन लोग का दिमाग खराब किया है 39B पढ़ाने में. 39D है ना, हाँ 39D बेसिकली जो भी इक्वालिटी देता है. और you can refer to article 326 which talks about universal adult franchise. Now going beyond this, you will explain all those provisions of the Constitution wherein affirmative action, that is positive discrimination, has been provided for vulnerable section. तो यहाँ आपको उस vulnerable section wise जाना पड़ेगा, basically dedicating one paragraph for each vulnerable section. So starting from women, you can refer that article 15 clause 3, and later on 73rd, 74th and 106th amendment provides for the positive discrimination. And here only you can say, and that's why the Chief Justice of India calls Indian Constitution, the former Chief Justice of India, D.Y. Chandrachud, calls Indian Constitution as a feminist document. Then you can refer to the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, or you can refer to इसके साथ ही या फिर let it be a separate group जिसमें आप बात करेंगे article 15 clause 4, relevant for 16 clause 4. You can refer to article 330 and 332 which provides for reservation in political representation. You can refer to 73rd and 74th amendment which talks about reservation for scheduled caste, scheduled tribe. You can refer to 338 and 338A which provides for a dedicated constitutional body for the safeguard of interest of these communities. You can even refer to 106th constitutional amendment which has a sub quota for scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, for scheduled caste, scheduled tribe women as such. So all the comprehensive features in the Indian Constitution which provides for affirmative action for scheduled caste, scheduled tribe. Then you can refer to the socially and educationally backward classes, article 15 clause 4, article 15 clause 5, you can refer. Then similar provisions in article 16 you can talk about. You can in fact also talk about the EWS, the 103rd amendment through which this provision has been made. There's another section, minority groups. which in the post-partition time, the concern for minorities. Now here you can in fact talk about starting from preamble, which talks about secularism, and you can talk about article 2930. You can talk about 350A and 350B, which is providing for the linguistic minorities. That means state will provide you education in your mother tongue as per the mandate of 350A if you belong to the linguistic minority, and 350B talks about a constitutional, an office of who is reporting to the president on the situations of the minority communities. Now when you explain all these things, then you will be talking about few judgments, and the first and foremost judgment would be Minerva Mills only, because DPSP essentially, यदि आप बात करेंगे, you can bring in some theory also here, that DPSP helps in ensuring positive constitutionalism, helps in developing state as a welfare state, and it has socialist principles, and therefore in Minerva Mills case, Supreme Court has already ruled that the balance between fundamental rights and DPSP is a basic structure. Okay, you can also talk about the case, what was the case related to Andhra Pradesh, जिसमें socialist शब्द को define किया गया था, Samatha versus state of Andhra Pradesh, wherein the Supreme Court said that socialist word in context of India is not having the European meaning, rather it means state is a welfare state. And in conclusion, you can say, despite the reforms of 1991, yet Indian state remains a welfare state and Indian constitution remains a socialist document. You can even refer to Rajiv Bhargava, he says that Indian constitution is a moral document. So if you talk about all these things, क्योंकि केवल socialist document कहना sufficient नहीं होगा, what is expected is that you write these provisions and then you conclude that it is a socialist. In fact, if you want to give a counter argument, आप 1991 reforms को refer कर सकते हैं. You can refer to the recent judgment in Property Owners Association versus State of Maharashtra, wherein Supreme Court has acknowledged that now we have moved from that particular ideology. But yet you should not be concluding that Indian constitution is not a socialist document. एक जो चीज हम भूल गए वो तो 42nd amendment, जिसने इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन को एक्सप्लिसिटली एक सोशलिस्ट डॉक्यूमेंट बनाया है. ठीक है. और गोइंग बैक, यू कैन ऑल्सो रेफर टू द कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंट असेंबली डिबेट, wherein Dr. Ambedkar clarified that the entire part 4 of the Indian constitution makes it a socialist document. So just saying all these arguments, starting from constituent assembly debate to the constitutional provision, to different amendments, to the Supreme Court judgments, and then you can conclude that Indian constitution is a socialist document. ये सारी चीजें लिखी हैं, कितना परसेंटेज लिखना पड़ेगा. आइडियली मेन एग्जाम में हो सकता है सारे नहीं लिख पाए, बट दिस इज, इफ यू राइट अ मॉडल आंसर ऑन दिस एंड यू लर्न दिस, इसका मे बी 80% वहां पे रिप्रोड्यूस हो पाएगा, एंड दैट वुड बी सफिशिएंट. बिकॉज एक्चुअली हमने देखा कि आंसर्स में बहुत ही एक डाइल्यूटेड वर्जन जा रहा है. सो इफ दे कैन राइट दैट डाइल्यूटेड वर्जन, यू कैन ऑल्सो राइट. थिंग इज दैट थोड़ा अभी से अवेयर हो जाना है. इफ यू प्रैक्टिस, एंड आई एम टेलिंग यू 100%, ये क्वेश्चन का मॉडल आंसर आज लिख ले रहे हो, इसको अब से लेके सिलेक्शन तक दोबारा लिखने की जरूरत नहीं पड़ेगी. जस्ट लर्न दिस एंड गो एंड राइट देयर. प्रॉब्लम हैपेंस जब हम सोचते हैं कि उसको और परफेक्ट कैसे बनाया जाए. ठीक है, तो वो कैसे इसको और बेहतर बनाया जाए कि बाकियों से एकदम अलग हो जाए. बाकियों से नहीं अलग, हमने अगेन आई वुड से टॉपर्स कॉपी देखो और सेम टेस्ट पेपर के बाकी टॉपर्स के आंसर्स देखो, 80% तो सेम ही आंसर, 20% अलग है. तो इसलिए उसको नहीं करना. ये मॉडल आंसर लिख लोगे, ठीक है. यू कैन दैट आई रेफर टू इक्वालिटी में बताया ना. हियर वी बेसिकली सेट, here we divided the question into two sections. All those areas wherein the constitution is providing equality in a social context wherein the society was not equal. तो हमने यहाँ पे रेफर किया ना 326. universal adult franchise. I have already referred here. Here we are talking about those provisions where positive discrimination has been provided. That means equality, यदि Indian Constitution में equality भी दे दिया गया होता, that in itself was revolutionary, because French Revolution gave French Constitution gave universal adult franchise only in 1946. They started in 1789. So giving equality would have been in itself revolutionary, but we gave equality and then we went a step ahead. In fact, in conclusion, you can also say that credit must be given to the Constituent Assembly, which was a body dominated by upper caste. It was a male dominated body dominated by the upper class, yet the provisions were made for the vulnerable sections. इसमें Article 46 हम mention करना भूल गए, because Article 46 also says that for the economic and educational interest of scheduled caste, scheduled tribe and weaker sections, the government will make provisions. Somewhere you can, although articles आ ही गए हैं, reservations की भी आप बात कर सकते. So there's lot that can be written. In fact, in this question you'll face the problem of कि content को और कहाँ लिखा जाए, because there's a lot of things that can be written in this answer. Going that far उतना स्कोप रहेगा नहीं यहाँ पे, ठीक है, और वो वीकर सेक्शन में आ जाएंगे ना आर्टिकल 46 में, सो उतना वी कैन नॉट गो टिल दैट लेवल, क्योंकि यहाँ पे इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन एज अ सोशल डॉक्यूमेंट, इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन की बात की जा रही है, जो कि वीकर सेक्शन में आ जाएगा. इफ यू आर रेफरिंग टू ट्रांसजेंडर, देन यू कैन रेफर टू द नालसा जजमेंट ऑफ 2014, जिसको सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने कहा कि द ट्रांसजेंडर्स मस्ट बी कैटेगराइज्ड एज सोशली एंड एजुकेशनली बैकवर्ड क्लासेस. क्योंकि सुप्रीम कोर्ट इज द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल कोर्ट और सुप्रीम कोर्ट इंटरप्रेट करता है, तो हाउ कैन, यहाँ पे मैंने कहीं भी लॉस की नहीं बात की, मैंने नेशनल कमीशन ऑफ वुमेन की नहीं बात की, मैंने जो भी स्टैट्यूटरी बॉडीज है उसकी, नेशनल कमीशन ऑफ माइनॉरिटीज की नहीं बात की. आई रिमेन स्टक टू द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल प्रोविजन, बट यू कैनॉट सेपरेट सुप्रीम कोर्ट फ्रॉम द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन. By their oath, Supreme Court judges, they are the protector of the Constitution. Supreme Court is the constitutional court. That's ठीक. हाँ हाँ, of course. Sorry. एक्ट्स लिखने का यहाँ पे स्कोप नहीं था, बिकॉज यहाँ पे इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन एज अ सोशल डॉक्यूमेंट बता रहा है. यदि ऐसा रहता कि ये सब लिखने के बाद आपके पास टाइम रहता तो आप जा सकते थे. तो डीपीएसपी तो हमने रेफर किया ना, नहीं, वी कैन रेफर, बट दैट इज ओपनिंग एंटायर स्कोप ऑफ राइटिंग लॉट मेनी लॉस. और यहाँ पे डिमांड ऑफ द क्वेश्चन नहीं है, इतना ही लिखने में आपका टाइम और स्पेस दोनों फिनिश हो जाए. दैट्स व्हाई यू कैन, मैंने बताया ना, डीपीएसपी पॉजिटिव कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनलिज्म को करता है. That can be used in the conclusion or in the introduction part. ठीक है, एक क्वेश्चन और करेंगे, राइट? Now write this question. Discuss the extent to which the Indian Constitution, discuss the extent to which the Indian Constitution reflects successful reconciliation of alternative perspectives ठीक है. Now this is the question, and the question number 10, it is related to, they are related to each other. Question number 10 says, comment on the Constituent Assembly was a one party body in an essentially one party country. The assembly was the Congress and the Congress was India. Now what will happen is that when you are dealing with a 20 marker question, इस question का theme क्या है? Theme is that the Constituent Assembly the theme of this question is that the Constituent Assembly had members from different perspectives. ये क्वेश्चन जो आपने लिखा उसका थीम क्या है कि द इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंट असेंबली हैड मेंबर्स फ्रॉम डिफरेंट आइडियोलॉजी, ये थीम है. क्वेश्चन नंबर 10, व्हाई आई हैव kept them together, because question number 10 says that constituent assembly was essentially an assembly of Congress, and they are these two sentences they are going against each other. पहला क्वेश्चन नंबर 9 कह रहा है कि constituent assembly was having members from all ideologies. Second is saying it was just from Congress. Somehow if it is a 20 marker, you'll have to jointly answer this, because again एक लाइन कही जा रही है कि constituent assembly and the constitution it produced was a Congress constitution, limited scope. But the another sentence is saying no, it was not limited, it was having diversity of the opinion. So in these type of questions also 20 marker रहे तो आपको दोनों के आंसर सेम हो सकते हैं. The answer for both the thing can be same. The only difference would be that in the second question you'll be starting with the premise, you'll be accepting that yes, Constituent Assembly was dominated by Congress. The statement of Ambedkar that Congress had Constituent Assembly in its possession, it is right. Granville Austin भी कहते हैं is right. But that would be just half the part of the answer. You'll be just acknowledging. You'll have to prove that although the Congress dominated, yet different perspectives were included into the Constituent Assembly. So both these questions can have a common answer. ठीक है. Ideally 20 marker मान के आप इसको approach करेंगे. So in the introduction you will accept that it was a house dominated by Congress. You will accept that it was a house which was dominated by the male members because there were only 15 female members. It was a house which was dominated by the upper caste, especially Brahmins. Winston Churchill called it the Assembly of Brahmins. It was a house dominated by upper class, that means rich people. It was a house which was dominated by Hindus. But this is just half of this argument. Then you'll say, despite this or nevertheless, the Indian constitution which emerged talked about a special provision for the vulnerable sections which were not proportionately representing campus. वो सारे हमने देखे कौन कौन से provisions. Why this happened? Because people from different perspectives were present in the house, and then you'll have to tell about what were the different perspectives. For this you can refer to the analysis done by Rajiv Bhargav. Now Rajiv Bhargav also acknowledges this fact that Congress and the liberal perspective or the socialist perspective led by Nehru dominated the house, but there were different gradation of ideological representation. And he says that of course Gandhians were in majority because of the legacy issue, because of the legacy of the Indian national movement, and Gandhian ideology being the hegemonic ideology, Gandhians were there. There were modernists. In modernists there were liberal democratic people or socialist democratic ideology. Liberal democratic ideology represented by leaders like Ambedkar, who would favor always constitutionalism, who would favor strong fundamental rights. Social liberals, social democrats like Nehru, who would prefer socialist nature of the state. who would prefer DPSPs. Right? Yet there were socialists like KT Shah. We have already seen that if one member in the Constituent Assembly can be called as a doctrinaire socialist, it was KT Shah, who supported the idea of adding the word socialist in the preamble, who said that DPSP must be made enforceable, who said that there should be the state must take private companies को भी state nationalize कर लेना चाहिए. So there were socialist people. Then there were people who were typically on the extreme left, communist people like Somnath Lahiri, who would say that there must be a provision that if the people are not satisfied with the constitution, there should be a provision for a violent revolution also. Typical communist, ekdam jo extreme Marxist perspective. And then there were also certain people who represented the Hindu right. And they were the people from within the Congress. People like Purushottam Das Tandon, P.D. Tandon, Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, M.R. Jaikar. They represented Hindu right within the fold of Congress. And then it was their effort that certain amendments were brought into the constitution back then. Sanskrit was given primary position into the constitution. All the provision related to the cow slaughter, the provisions related to Hindi as they demanded Hindi as the only official language and the national language, but English was also kept in. So when you look into the composition of the house, you will find that there were people from different ideological perspective who were present there. And the conclusion from Granville Austin, that it's true that Constituent Assembly was, the same logic can come to the conclusion also. It is true that Constituent Assembly was dominated by Congress, but it is also true that Congress itself was a rainbow coalition of different ideologies. And the major opposition for Congress came from within the Congress only. And in the first, in the first general elections, almost the same composition was replicated as the Constituent Assembly. In the conclusion, the biggest defense of the multi-ideological nature of the Constituent Assembly is that the Indian Constitution survives till date. हमने एक study refer किया है that across the world, that average life of any constitution is just 17 years. And we have seen even countries like France, they have changed, it is their 5th constitution. So the very reason that the Indian Constitution has survived till now is because it was an inclusive house and the method of consensus was an inclusive method. So this way you can actually prove that it was a multi-diverse. ऐसे करते हैं, ठीक है, लिख लेंगे, चलो चलो लिखो, राइट, आंसर लिखो और क्या लिखो, चलो राइट. Right. Pratap Bhanu Mehta calls Indian Constitution a unique experiment of constitutionalism where the constitution was not the result of a revolution but the constitution itself was revolutionary. Christophe Jeffrelot has argued that India's silent revolution traces its roots in the socialist nature of the constitution. Socialist nature of the constitution. Granville Austin has rightly called Indian constitution as a social document. Next paragraph. हम सोशल डॉक्यूमेंट वाले क्वेश्चन पे जा रहे हैं, ये अलग पर्सपेक्टिव वाला है ना, ठीक है. नेक्स्ट पैराग्राफ. राइट. although the Constituent Assembly was dominated by Congress party, full stop. Upper caste Hindus were more in number. It was a male-dominated assembly. Yet the Constitution provides special provision for vulnerable sections. This is because the assembly had representation from all major ideological perspectives. Next paragraph. As per the analysis of Rajiv Bhargava, the Constituent Assembly was majorly represented by traditionalists and Gandhian, traditionalists like traditionalists and Gandhians. However, even modernists were represented like liberal democrats, in bracket write Ambedkar, Patel, who would support stronger individual rights, that is fundamental rights. Full stop. Social democrats like Nehru, were in favor of stronger socialist principles in DPSPs, and special provisions for minorities. Next paragraph. Socialists like K.T. Shah supported the idea of declaring India as a socialist country, making DPSPs enforceable, and nationalizing private enterprises. Next paragraph. Extreme leftists like Somnath Lahiri, Lahiri, supported the idea of implementing right inverted comma dictatorship of proletariats in India, nationalizing even private properties and providing for violent method to overthrow the state. Overthrow the state, जो मार्क्सिस्ट ट्रेडिशन कहता है. नेक्स्ट पैराग्राफ. The Hindu rightist ideology. The Hindu rightist ideology was represented by members like Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, M.R. Jayakar, Purushottam Das Tandon, they wanted the implementation of Uniform Civil Code, supported the provision of cow protection, in bracket right, Article 48, supported Article 343 for giving primary emphasis on Hindi, and Article 351 providing for special importance to Sanskrit. 351 providing special importance to Sanskrit. Therefore, next paragraph, therefore the Constituent Assembly was an inclusive assembly which worked on the principle of consensus. This inclusive nature has helped Indian Constitution to sustain for more than 7 decades. तीन पेज कितना हुआ? अरे तुम कैसे लिखते हो? 1.5 पेज हुआ, कितना पेज हुआ? हो गया ना? ठीक है. सो बाकी वो सोशल डॉक्यूमेंट वाला एक बार खुद से लिख लेना, ठीक है? And rest of the question we'll see in the next class. This document you have, read this. It has the provisions of mentorship, what all is included, and if you have any query related to that, you can reach out to the admission team. Okay, thank you.